Goeiemorgen, good morning, Sunny Bunani, bonjour, ni hao. Today we're going to learn how to make oh boy, and here the confusion with terminology starts. In the UK, this is called a double crochet. In the US, it is called a single crochet. Not at all confusing. In Afrikaans, this is called a kort binkie, which literally means short leg, because it is the shortest crochet stitch that stands on its own two legs. Because of the different terminology, it is important that you pay attention when reading a pattern if the pattern is written in US crochet terms or UK crochet terms. Most of the time I will be using the UK crochet terms by default. However, I will try to remember to mention the US terms, since there are so many patterns available in US terminology, and it's good to be comfortable with both of them. After all that, let's get started. I'm going to make a few chains just so that we have something on which to attach the kort binkie, or in UK, the double crochet. Crochet work is usually attached to something else, like the chain stitches are attached to one another, but the majority of them then goes down. Let me try to explain that better. So there's the starting yarn end lying there on one side, and then there's the knot with which we started. Then comes the chain stitches, which is usually done from left to right if you're right-handed. There is the chain. In order to keep working, crochet is worked back and forth in rows or in rounds, but it's done from the right to the left. Apart from the chain, everything else is done from the right to the left. So every next stitch will be worked down from the top to the bottom, down into each of these chains. In order for that to work, after making the chains, you need to get your needle one up so that you are at this elevated height to work down. It is usually accomplished by making more chain stitches depending on the height of the stitch that you are using for the pattern. In double crochet or US single crochet, one chain stitch will bring your hook and yarn to the height you need so that you can start working down double crochets or US single into every stitch. So here there will be one extra chain that is not counted as a stitch to bring you to the height to start working all these kort binkies, UK double crochet, into every stitch below that. This extra chain here that does not count and is not worked into is called the turning chain. There are other ways to turn the crochet work and to get to the new height, but by far the most common and often used way is by making a turning chain to bring up the needle to the extra height. Let's see this in crochet. Here are the chain stitches. As you can see, currently the needle and the yarn that we're working with is at exactly the same height as these chains. Since we're working down into the next stitch in crochet, we need to get the yarn and needle up a little bit. That is accomplished by making a turning chain. And don't let the extra parts to the name confuse you. It is just a chain stitch. The only difference is that this chain stitch, called the turning chain, will not count and we will never work into it. To make it easier for you to distinguish between them, you will put a stitch marker at the bottom of this turning chain so that you know that this one does not count. Let us proceed to making the double crochet in UK terms or single crochet in US terms. To do that, remember, we do not count this very first chain. We go to the second chain. So here is the yarn currently around the hook, the loop on the hook. Here is the first chain called the turning chain, and that is the one that we will not work into, we will ignore. This chain here is then the one that we want to work in. So crochet hook into the top loop of that chain, yarn around the hook, pull the yarn and hook with it through that loop. You will now have 2 loops on the hook, the one that was there to start off with and the one that you just pulled from the working yarn through that first chain. Then yarn around the hook again and pull it through the 2 loops on the hook. That is your first double crochet, UK term, or single crochet, US terms. Let's do that again. This chain we already worked into. You can see there's loops going through it. That's the one we're done with. So we want to now work into the next chain. Hook through the chain, grab the yarn and pull it through that chain. So again, you will have 2 loops on the hook. Yarn around the hook and pull it through both those 2 chains. This will be the completed stitch, and the yarn that you just pulled through will be the new loop on the hook. Let's try that one more time. Go to the next chain that you have not worked into yet. Insert the hook, yarn around the hook, pull it through that chain. There's now 2 loops on the hook, the one that we started off with and the one that we just pulled through. Yarn around the hook again, pull it through both those 2 loops, completing the stitch, leaving the new loop on the hook. That will be your 3rd stitch, your 3rd double crochet, UK terms, or single crochet, US terms. So if you look at the work now, here you can see the bottom loops of the chains when we made the chain stitches. Here on the side is the one chain that we did not work into, that didn't count, the one with the stitch marker in. And then the new stitches that we've just made. 1 loop on the hook. This is the working yarn attached to the skein. Hook through the next chain stitch, yarn around the hook, pull it through that chain stitch. There's now 2 loops on the hook, yarn around the hook and pull through both of the loops on the hook, completing your stitch. And you can see how the V's formed at the top of every stitch will be the new stitches that you work into on the next row. We'll get to that in a bit. There is the yarn on the hook. There is the new stitch worked into this chain, and the gap is so big because I'm pulling it apart, trying to make it clearer on the video. That is the next chain that we must work into. Insert the hook into that chain, yarn around the hook and pull it through the chain. There is now 2 loops on the hook. The 2nd loop just pulled through the chain now. Yarn around the hook and pull the yarn through both loops on the hook, leaving a new loop on the hook and one stitch completed. Again, you can see which chain has already been worked into. You go to the next chain, insert the hook into that next chain, yarn around the hook, pull it through the chain, yarn around a hook a second time so that you can pull it through both the loops on the hook, completing the stitch. Okay, this is working the double crochet in UK terminology, or single crochet in US terminology, or kortbinkie in Afrikaans, which makes sense. Sorry, I'm biased, I like my language. Into the chain stitch with which we started, also called the foundation chain stitch, because those chains are just the foundation on which the rest of the crochet will be built up. Now we're at the last chain. There's the chain we just worked into. There is one more chain stitch, and then there is the slip knot that we started off with. So insert the hook into that last chain stitch just before the knot from the slip knot, yarn around the hook, pull it through the last chain, yarn around the hook, pull through both loops on the hook. That is one row of double crochet in UK terms, or single crochet in US terms, completed. To do the next row, you'll turn your work, because you always work from the right to left when you crochet in rows. If we go back to the picture, we have now finished this row. And turn the work around. So there was the starting tail, the slip knot, the chain stitches. We made a turning chain, and then from this side we worked into every chain at the bottom. Now we're here. The hook and yarn is at this height. We want to work again, which means we need to make another turning chain to bring the yarn and hook to this height, so that again from right to left we can work down into each stitch across to the other side with hook and yarn instead of leaky cokey. To bring up the work to the correct height, we make one more chain. Again, this is a turning chain that will not be worked into. It has no function other than lifting up the height of the yarn and hook. There is the loop currently on the hook. There is the turning chain that does not count as a stitch and that we will not work into. And this here then will be the first stitch for this row, which is the last stitch of the previous row. And if we turn it over to the side, you can see that this turning chain is not attached to the work below it, but the first stitch, the one with the stick sticking through it, is attached to the first chain that we had. So now that we have made the double crochet stitch into the chains, let's also make it into another stitch so that you can see. If it helps, you can turn the work towards you so that you can more clearly see the V's on top. Insert the hook into that first V, yarn around the hook, pull it through both of those just like before. You have two loops on the hook, yarn around the hook, and pull it through both of those loops on the hook. The yarn that you just pulled through will be the new loop on the hook. Move on to the next stitch. You can see the one that we've just worked into is not visible anymore, and the first one from the right that you can see is the stitch that we should work in next. If you look from the side, there's a little hole where your hook will go through underneath both of the loops of the stitch. Yarn around the hook, pull it through. You have 2 loops on the hook, yarn around the hook and pull it through both loops on the hook, making your second stitch. And if you turn here, there is the turning chain that does not count. There is the first double crochet we've made into the new row. There is the second double crochet we've made, and then the loop on the hook, which we will tighten to work the next stitch. Okay, there is the last stitch you've made. Crochet hook through the next stitch, working towards the left. If you pull it towards you, you can see it going through both loops. Yarn around the hook, pull it through both those loops so that it goes through the stitch, 2 loops on the hook, yarn around the hook again and pull through both the loops on the hook. Hook through the next stitch, yarn around the hook, pull it through, yarn around, pull through both loops on the hook. 1 loop on the hook, hook through the next stitch, yarn around the hook, pull it through, yarn around the hook, pull through both loops on the hook. In summary, double crochet for UK terminology, single crochet for US terminology, kort binkie in Afrikaans. Insert hook into the next stitch. Yarn around the hook, pull it through the stitch, 2 loops on the hook, yarn around the hook, pull through both. Into the last stitch, insert the hook, yarn around the hook, pull it through, 2 loops on the hook, yarn around the hook, pull through both loops. Do not work into the turning chain, that does not count as a stitch. Make a new turning chain before you start the next row, if the next row also is double crochet, and insert the hook into that very first place that you have after the turning chain, yarn around the hook, pull it through, 2 loops on the hook, yarn around the hook, pull through both loops on the hook. Have fun crafting!